What if I told you an Amish wife could find her husband's secret the same way any wife might, a hidden phone, a receipt that doesn't add up except for her? The discovery isn't only a marriage problem. It's a question her whole church will eventually answer. The night she found out, it usually isn't dramatic. A coat pocket left unzipped, a buggy parked too long behind the feed store, a folded receipt for something that doesn't belong in an Amish household at all. For one wife, it was a cheap prepaid phone tucked beneath barn rags, still warm from being used minutes before she walked in. She didn't scream. She set it back exactly where she found it and went back to hanging laundry, her hands steady, her mind anything but. What counts as breaking the Ordnung? The Ordnung is the unwritten set of rules that governs nearly every part of Amish life, from dress to technology to how a man runs his business. It is not written in the Bible, but most Amish believe it reflects biblical principle, and every district has its own version. Breaking it can mean owning a cell phone, hiding a car, running an unsanctioned business, or simply behaving in a way the community labels worldly. Twice a year, before communion, members are asked to confirm their unity with it. A husband secretly violating it isn't just bending a rule, he's breaking a promise made before the whole church. The question she couldn't ask. For 3 days she carried it alone, turning the same question over while she kneaded bread and fed the chickens. Should she ask him outright and watch his face when he lied, or already knew the truth to her? Should she wait, hoping it was a one-time lapse, a moment of weakness rather than a pattern? Every wife in her position eventually faces the same quiet arithmetic. How much do you risk exposing, both about him and about the marriage itself? By simply asking the question everyone else assumes you already know the answer to? Confronting him meant making the secret real, undeniable, something that could no longer be quietly managed between the two of them. She said nothing yet. She just watched him closer than before, noticing details she'd overlooked for years. Her own name on the line. What outsiders rarely understand is that a wife's silence carries its own weight within the church. If a husband's violation comes to light later and it becomes known that she knew and said nothing, her own standing can be questioned alongside his. Amish church membership is built on mutual accountability, members watching over members, and a wife who covers for a husband's wrongdoing risks being seen as complicit rather than simply loyal. This isn't written into any rule book, but every Amish woman raised in the faith understands it instinctively. The same way she understands which fabrics are acceptable for a dress or which colors are too bold for a bonnet. Her silence wasn't just about protecting him anymore. It was about protecting herself, her children, and her own place within the only community she had ever known. If the marriage one day ended in shunning, she would still need to live among these same neighbors, attend the same church services, raise her children inside the same tight web of relationships that made up her entire world. The choice between husband and church, by the second week, watching wasn't enough anymore. She had seen the phone twice more, once tucked under a hay bale, once half hidden in his work coat. She began noticing other things too, evenings he claimed to be at a neighbor's that didn't add up, a new wariness in how he answered simple questions. The choice in front of her wasn't really husband versus church, though it felt that way at 2 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. It was closer to a choice between two kinds of loyalty. Loyalty to the man she married, who deserved a chance to make this right quietly, and loyalty to the vows she'd made to the church long before she ever met him, vows that asked her to hold the community's well-being above any single relationship, even her own marriage. She thought about her mother, who had once faced something similar with an uncle by marriage, and how the family had handled it among themselves before it ever reached the bishop's ears. Maybe that was still possible here. Maybe a private conversation, one honest confrontation between husband and wife, could end this before anyone else needed to know. She decided to try that first. Not out of fear of the church, but out of a stubborn hope that the man she married was still, underneath this secret, the same man who had once seemed incapable of choosing anything over her. What she decided to do. She chose the evening carefully, after the children were asleep and the dishes were put away, the kind of quiet hour when difficult conversations sometimes find room to breathe. She placed the phone on the table between them without a word at first, just set it down and watched his face change. There was no shouting. Amish households are not known for raised voices, and this one held to that even now, in a moment that would have justified one. Instead, there was a long, terrible silence, the kind that says more than accusation ever could. When she finally spoke, she didn't ask why. She asked how long. He told her 3 months, maybe 4, though she suspected longer. He said it started small, a way to check grain prices faster than the community phone shanty allowed, and grew from there into something he couldn't quite explain even to himself. She listened without interrupting, filing away every detail, deciding in real time whether this was a man who had stumbled once or a man who had built a second life she knew nothing about. By the end of the conversation, she had made her decision. She would not go to the bishop herself, not yet. She gave him 1 week to either confess it on his own or put the phone away permanently and never touch it again. If he failed to do either, she told him plainly, she would no longer carry the weight of his secret alone. The choice, for now, belonged to him. The visit from the elder. The week passed, and the phone disappeared from the barn rags. But disappeared is not the same as confessed. She noticed he never spoke of it again, never brought it up himself, and she began to suspect he was hoping the matter would simply fade if neither of them mentioned it. It was a neighbor, not her, who finally brought it to light. He had been seen using the phone outside the feed store, and word travels quickly through a close-knit district, even one that prizes privacy as much as this one does. Within days, an elder from the church came to visit, as is customary when word of a violation reaches leadership. This is not typically a harsh encounter. Amish church discipline is built around patience and gradual escalation rather than immediate punishment, and the elder's role at this stage is simply to discuss the matter gently but directly, and to ask the member to bring his behavior back in line with the Ordnung. He sat at their kitchen table, the same table where she had set the phone down weeks earlier, and spoke quietly with her husband while she busied herself nearby, close enough to hear most of it. The elder did not raise his voice either. He spoke of unity, of the promise made before communion, of how one member's secret can quietly erode trust across an entire district if left unaddressed. He gave her husband a choice that mirrored almost exactly the one she had already given him: confess and correct the behavior, or face escalating consequences that could eventually include the ban. Her husband, visibly shaken in a way she hadn't seen since their wedding day, agreed to bring the matter before the church himself. The silence between them. The days between the elder's visit and the confession itself were the hardest of the marriage so far. They moved through chores together the way they always had, milking, cooking, tending children, but something between them had gone quiet in a way that had nothing to do with politeness. She found herself studying him across the supper table, wondering how much of the man she'd married had been performance and how much had been real. He, for his part, seemed to carry a visible weight, shoulders bent slightly more than usual, eyes avoiding hers in moments that used to hold easy warmth. Neighbors began to sense something too, the way close communities always do, even without being told directly. A few women asked careful, gentle questions when she brought eggs to the Saturday stand, questions that weren't really about eggs at all. She answered them honestly but briefly, neither denying trouble nor inviting gossip, walking the narrow line every Amish wife in her position has had to walk before her. Word of an upcoming confession spreads quickly in a district this size, and by the time Sunday's service approached, most of the congregation already suspected what was coming, even if no one said so aloud. At home, she found herself praying in a way she hadn't in years, not for her husband to be spared consequences, but for the marriage itself to survive whatever came next. She thought about her children, old enough now to sense the tension even if they didn't understand its source, and about the example being set for them in how their parents handled failure and forgiveness. She also thought, more quietly than she would admit to anyone, about whether she herself had grown distant in ways that left room for secrets to take root, a thought she neither fully believed nor could fully dismiss. Whatever happened on Sunday, she decided she would not let this moment define the rest of their life together. She just didn't yet know what that meant in practice. The confession. Sunday service was held, as it always was, in a member's home rather than a church building, the benches arranged in rows across what was usually a living room. She sat in her customary place among the women, her husband across the aisle among the men, the physical distance between them feeling larger than it ever had in 8 years of marriage. The service proceeded normally at first, hymns sung slowly in the old style, scripture read aloud, until the moment everyone in the room had been quietly anticipating arrived. Her husband stood. In Amish confession, there is no dramatic speech, no detailed accounting of the wrongdoing laid out for an audience. The tradition calls for something simpler and, in its own way, harder. A plain acknowledgement of having sinned against the church and a request for forgiveness delivered with visible humility rather than elaborate explanation. He spoke only a few sentences. He admitted to owning and using a forbidden phone, acknowledged that this violated the Ordnung he had promised before communion to uphold, and asked the congregation's forgiveness. She watched him from across the room, this man she had confronted at her own kitchen table weeks earlier, now standing exposed in front of every person who mattered to their shared life. There was no anger left in her in that moment, only something closer to grief mixed with relief. Grief for the version of their marriage that had existed before any of this. Relief that the secret was finally, fully out in the open, where it could actually be addressed rather than managed in silence. What forgiveness costs a marriage. Forgiveness within the church came quickly, almost surprisingly so to outsiders who imagine Amish discipline as uniformly harsh. The congregation's job, in cases of honest confession, is to restore rather than to punish indefinitely, and within that single Sunday service, her husband standing in the church was formally repaired. But church forgiveness and marital forgiveness, she learned in the weeks that followed, do not move at the same speed, and they don't ask the same questions of a person. The congregation could forgive a violation of rules. She had to forgive a violation of trust, and those are not the same wound, no matter how closely tied to the same act. In the months after the confession, she found herself working through a private kind of grief that had nothing to do with the church's process and everything to do with rebuilding her own sense of safety inside her marriage. She asked him questions in quiet moments, not to punish him further, but because she genuinely needed to understand how the secrecy had started, what it meant about the parts of himself he hadn't shared with her, and whether there were other gaps between them she hadn't yet discovered. Whether that change would last, she couldn't know yet. Trust, she was discovering, doesn't return all at once just because a congregation has spoken forgiveness over a person. It returns slowly, through ordinary days that go exactly as promised. One supper, one honest conversation, one unremarkable evening at a time, until eventually the marriage feels whole again, or at least different enough from before that whole no longer feels like the wrong word for it. What happens when an Amish wife catches her husband breaking the Ordnung is rarely the dramatic confrontation outsiders might imagine. There is no shouting match, no immediate exile, no public spectacle drawn out for weeks. Instead, there is a quiet, careful process built around the hope of restoration rather than punishment, a system that asks for honesty over hiding and gives genuine room for a person to correct course before the consequences become permanent. For the wife at the center of it, the experience asks something the church's rules never fully account for. How do you rebuild private trust in a marriage after a public confession has already settled the matter for everyone else watching? The answer for most Amish wives who have walked this path is patience measured in ordinary days rather than dramatic gestures. The church can declare a man forgiven in a single Sunday service, but a wife's heart works on a slower timeline, rebuilt one honest conversation at a time, one season of consistent behavior at a time, until the marriage either finds its way back to something solid or quietly continues to struggle beneath a surface that looks repaired to everyone outside it. What makes this story worth telling isn't the scandal of a hidden phone or a broken rule. It's the reminder that even within a community built on order, discipline, and shared faith, marriage still asks two people to do the harder, slower work of forgiveness that no congregation, however well-intentioned, can fully do for them.